The sun never sets on the Big Ten. Welcome to July 1st of 2022, where USC and UCLA are now joining the Big Ten at the start of the 2024 academic year. This is insanity. This is crazy. And honestly, this shouldn't come as a surprise, but to a certain degree, it does. I can't even help myself to say that. I mean, bypassing the Big 12, Nebraska's former playmates, and just diving right into the Pac-12, and taking the Pac-12's best football program and their best basketball program historically and moving them right to the Big Ten, that's crazy. It's bold. I don't necessarily like it from a geographical standpoint, but from a strategic standpoint, I absolutely love it. The Big Ten, in doing this, has added the second best TV market in Los Angeles, California, and they're going to take their piece from the sixth best TV market, which is the San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose market from California as well. So on part of the Big Ten and Kevin Warren, this is genius. I think it's a nice response to the SEC adding Texas and Oklahoma. And the Big Ten already made the most money out of all of the conferences, mostly from their academic research. They added two amazing schools in the realm of academics who are AAU universities in UCLA and USC. So those numbers, both from a football standpoint, an academic standpoint, from a revenue standpoint, they're all about to go even higher than they already are. I initially reacted to this in somewhat disbelief. I was at work, and I think the reports on this were releasing an hour or so, maybe a little more, afternoon. My memory might not serve me well in that category, but it was certainly in the afternoon hours. Reports were coming out that UCLA and USC were finalizing deals to join the Big Ten, and that some or most analysts were 90% sure that this was going to be a done deal. Perhaps a press conference addressing this issue from UCLA and USC would be happening as soon as what was yesterday night. And then a few hours after that, reports came out per Pete Thamel and others that the deal was already done, that this whole announcement thing was really just a formality, or an attempt at a formality between USC and UCLA. I mean, the Pac-12 is obviously furious. The Pac-12 Big Ten ACC alliance, to me, possibly just smells like the Big Ten just picking away the best parts of the Pac-12. I don't know what's up with the ACC. I wouldn't be surprised if, let's say, Miami, Florida State, Clemson, and others decide to pack up their stuff and leave for the SEC or something. That wouldn't surprise me either. But the Pac-12 has been known as the weakest division in college football for quite some time. The ACC is weak, but they have Clemson, they have Florida State, they have Miami, and they have some teams that for 2022 look to possibly be playoff contenders. I would say Clemson's probably the only one, but some argue that NC State and others could certainly be in that conversation. The ACC is something. They've actually won more national titles than even the Big Ten has in the college football playoff era. And I think even if you combine the CFP and BCS era, they also have more national titles. So, yeah. But the Pac-12, you haven't had a CFP national champion in the playoff era. You've had Oregon and Washington who have appeared once, and they have not gotten back, arguably not even close to getting back, as they've had 2 losses or more in every season except for the season they made the playoff. And even in the seasons where they made the playoff, they had 1 loss in conference. The Pac-12 is just weak. They have one of the worst TV deals. To a certain degree, in retrospect, it was only a matter of time before someone picked off some of the best schools. And now Washington and Oregon, and we'll read articles discussing Washington and Oregon and the USC-UCLA move, but the Huskies and the Ducks are looking to join the Big Ten Conference per reports. And I wouldn't be surprised, depending on if the Big Ten wants more Pac-12 schools, or maybe they go the route and want to pick off like Kansas or TCU or Iowa State, though I guarantee Iowa would block that. But depending on what route they want to go, if they want to get to 20 teams, Utah, Colorado, Stanford, other Pac-12 AAU schools that do have relevance both in the sport of football, whether it's historical or current. So super conferences are the way forward, and it certainly looks like the Big Ten is heading that way. A lot of people are talking about how they think that college football is going to become, there's going to be less conferences, possibly only two. If there are only two, it's likely going to be the Big Ten and SEC, as those right now have the most power, the most money, the most reputation. I mean, the SEC, by blue blood status, you have Texas, Oklahoma, Alabama. You have three. And Georgia and LSU, Tennessee, Florida are all close to that within their own right. And then in the Big Ten, you have Michigan, you have Ohio State, you have Nebraska, you have now USC, and Penn State's close in their own right. So, I mean, those two conferences have a lot of blue bloods. They have a lot of money, whether it's made through football, which is more so the SEC, or academics, which is more so the Big Ten. Anyway, both make tons of money. They have tons of resources. There's a reason why these two are the ones who are expanding the most. The SEC poached two blue bloods, the two biggest schools from the Big 12, and USC, being the biggest school in the Pac-12, was just poached by the Big Ten. I'll say this too. It's really weird seeing that USC logo and then the Big Ten logo under it. USC Athletics made an Instagram post announcing their move to the Big Ten, and it combines those two logos. It looks so weird. I encourage you to just look at that. I'll probably link that down below. Just look at that logo or that post, that image for a minute and just let it sink in. It is strange. I will tell you that. But now we're going to specifically talk about the USC UCLA move, talk about Washington and Oregon, and where the Pac-12 stands and what members could potentially join the Big Ten, and talk about some other potential members. So the 2024 editions officially are just these two. So far it's just USC, just UCLA. Oregon and Washington are eyeing the situation. I bet you other bigger Pac-12 schools are. Potentially as many as possible. Every school obviously wants to get as much money as they can. They want to better their football program or athletic program, whatever you want to call it. Or even if they don't want that, again, back to reason number one, they want more money. So I imagine every Pac-12 school with power is eyeing this issue. Certainly. So, first and foremost, I want to read an article by Ryan McGee on ESPN discussing the SEC Big Ten battle and how the USC UCLA move impacts that. And then I'm going to read an article by Corey Linsner from Yahoo Sports talking about Washington and Oregon eyeing Big Ten admittance. The British fleet had the Spanish Armada, McGee says. The United States had the Soviet Union, the Beatles had the Rolling Stones, the French Empire had the British Empire. Now the SEC has the Big Ten. For others in the world of college sports, hearing that hurts. The truth always does. Just as there were other navies, other nations, and other rock bands, ultimately everyone else in the room, no matter who they are or what they've done or what they still might do, they all end up standing against the walls and watching who really matters do what really matters. The Big Ten, by the way, depending on who they add, could span all 4 time zones in the mainland 48 states, obviously excluding Alaska and Hawaii. But Pacific time zone, Mountain West time zone, Eastern time zone, Central time zone. The Big Ten could span all 4 time zones. That to me sounds like the college football edition of the British Empire, where the sun never sets. And again, geographically it doesn't make sense, but if you're going to get schools from California, I want the Big Ten to get schools from all 4 time zones to make it look at least sensible, to make it look fairly spread out and even to a certain degree. Because there are only 2 players in a chess match, and apologies for the cliche, but there are only 2 true chess masters in today's college athletics. 2 superpowers with the fanciest playing pieces, specifically Oklahoma and Texas, and now UCLA and USC. The rest are playing checkers. They might have some nice pieces here and there, but they don't have the whole set. Only the Big Ten and the SEC do. Besides, we can't use the examples of strategy or risk. Those games you've used maps. If we've learned nothing else over the past 24 hours, the maps no longer matter because cherry-picking USC and UCLA from Southern California, where the furthest Big Ten West school is currently Nebraska, that's not a risk move. You're not taking territory next to yours. That would, in war, be like dropping a whole paratrooper division behind enemy lines in a certain sense. The last place where it sort of did was in the Pac-12. Even while making plenty of missteps over the years and all other things, repeatedly whiffing on the college football playoff berths, a conference title game no one attended, and a since departed commissioner no one seemed to like outside of San Francisco. The one aspect of being a Power 5 conference that the Pac-12 got right was geography. It long ago locked down nearly every big brand name and TV market west of the Rockies, when the SEC was trying to convince us that Auburn was in the west and Missouri was in the east, and the Big Ten was stretching itself, trying to get Rutgers, Maryland, possibly even West Virginia, which the Big 12 got, and other stuff. The Pac-12 was always the neatest part of expansion. When the Pac-16 was trying to be formed, which was going to be the first super conference, they didn't expand to teams out east. The furthest east they went was into Texas. They wanted Texas and I think Texas TCU, some other schools, Colorado. Colorado was actually going to be the first phase of that plan. They joined, Texas opted out, and then everyone opted out after that, and they only got Colorado and Utah. Utah was a part of the Mountain West before joining the Pac-12. But that was more than a decade gone by. As former Caltech visiting professor Albert Einstein would remind us, time is a relative concept, and in this era of college football sports, 11 years is just totally different, probably closer to a century than not. So it is that the games we have to wait for New Year's 6 to see, USC versus Michigan, UCLA versus Wisconsin, all that stuff, possibly Oregon versus Wisconsin, normal Rose Bowl matchup, and seeing that Oregon's eyeing the Big Ten, that stuff, that might happen in your regular season. As foreign as that sounds, as potentially scary as that sounds, it might happen. And because of this, because this means the Big Ten is expanding to at least 16 teams, probably more to balance things out geographically, so probably you're looking at minimum 18 with Washington and Oregon, and more realistically than not 20, as you want some teams more so probably in that mountain region or plains region near Nebraska to again make everything look clean and even, while of course adding more revenue, more fan bases, potentially even more rivalries. This is going to move the Big Ten away from divisions. The Big Ten's probably going to move to a more round-robin schedule, and the way that this will work, or one of the ways that this could work, is probably all of the teams are only going to get one or two. I, of course, would prefer two as a Michigan fan. I want to play at least Michigan and Ohio State, pardon my brain fart. Ohio State and Michigan State are the teams that I want to play every year. Every year. Everyone else, don't necessarily care. You can rotate. But I'm thinking one or two protected rivals at most. Everything else is round robin. That way you get to play as many other teams as you want without having too many locked up opponents. It would make everything more fair, give teams better chances to reach the playoff, I think, and it would just, I think, make it more fun. And it wouldn't be abandoning tradition either, because there are people who think that you got to abandon all those games to go into the future. You can't have your protected rivalries at all. There are some who think you should have 3 protected rivalries, or that pods should exist, which would mean like 4 protected rivals. Pods are divisions, but much smaller and split into 4, for example, or 5, rather than, let's just say, the standard 2. But I'm thinking round-robin schedule, 1 or 2 protected rivalries, depending on the team. I would probably lean toward 2 as a Michigan fan myself. But I think that the SEC and the Big Ten, they're in a battle now. They've poached two great schools from two Power 5 conferences, and this is certainly going to amp up the rivalry between the two. Reading the rest of the article would take too long, but it's describing exactly what the title says. That both of these schools, they're amping everything up. They're playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. Possibly they're inventing a new game of chess. They're just that far ahead, honestly, that compared to the rest of the Power 5 conferences. And then Washington and Oregon eyeing Big Ten admittance. USC and UCLA made the jump from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten. They're set to join the conference in 2022, and it's no secret that other schools will likely make an attempt to follow the two schools. Two schools that are already proposing the idea of piggybacking USC and UCLA are Washington and Oregon. Washington has a rich football history, and Oregon, they don't have the richest football history. They have no national champions. They have been good in the 21st century, like really good, one of the more successful programs nationally. And Mike Black reported on Twitter that Oregon and Washington have applied to join the Big Ten from what at fifth quarter has told us should be a decision tonight. I don't know how accurate that tweet is. This article is rather short, but I'm still going to link it down below. But it would make sense, which is why I included it. Oregon, Washington, they're on the higher level of the playing field compared to the rest of the Pac-12, similarly to UCLA and USC, or at least USC if we're talking about only football. So I think that makes sense. I wouldn't be surprised if something from those two universities came out sooner rather than later. So what are your thoughts on this as the people? Are you comfortable with this being the future? Is this the map of the Big Ten that you want to see? Look at it. You have, I think, Utah and Colorado. I debated this in my head because assuming Washington and Oregon join, that's 18 teams, probably want to move to 20, or they're probably going to just to create that super conference. And I was thinking either it's two more from the Pac-12 or two from the Big 12. And from the Big 12, Kansas would probably be a very obvious choice. AAU school, basketball, blue blood, and they're not great at football, but it's a former Big 12 team. Geographically makes the most sense. You're not taking Missouri from the SEC, and Pittsburgh would be blocked. I know they're from the ACC, but Penn State would probably block them. Iowa would probably block Iowa State, etc. And Oklahoma State, TCU, those other schools, they're so down. They're really so down south that I just don't know if they would get in. I don't even know if those schools are AAU schools. And the Big Ten does. They very much do. They prioritize that. They prioritize academics. It's part of the reason why they make the money that they make. So I just went with the Pac-12, Utah and Colorado. They're rivals, so it'd be adding a nice rivalry game in here. They're both AAU schools, and adding Colorado adds Nebraska, who has not really fit into the Big Ten. It adds them a playmate. It adds them a rival. Colorado and Nebraska, look it up. It's a rivalry that some have forgotten, but it's a great one. A very great rivalry, and when both schools were good in the 80s and 90s, it was intense. It meant a lot, and it did, at points, decide who won the Big 8, which was the predecessor to the Big 12 at the time. So this is what the future could very well look like. USC and UCLA joining is a given. Oregon and Washington, it looks like it's only a matter of time. Utah, Colorado, I've heard nothing about them, but this is just me speculating, shooting something out there. I think that adding Utah and Colorado would give you some teams in the Mountain Time Zone. Already have some teams in the Central Time Zone, the Eastern Time Zone, and obviously the Pacific Time Zone with UCLA and USC, and likely Oregon and Washington. This map, the Big Ten, would span all four time zones in the lower 48 states. All of them. It would span all four time zones, which is crazy. It's something that the SEC, they don't have that. They only span two time zones, even with the additions of Texas and Oklahoma. No other conference does that. None. No other conference does that. So I think that I think that this would be, I'm conflicted. Amazing in the sense of the Big Ten's just going to get richer. 20 teams in here, as long as the Big Ten and SEC aren't the only conferences, because then that would be two conferences. It would be too similar to the NFL. But if there are like 3 or 4 or 5 even super conferences at the FBS level, I'd say the more the merrier, because surprise teams do happen. I like seeing the insane amount of teams at the FBS level play. The more games, the better, in my opinion, as long as the college football playoff is expanded to, I'd say, at least 8 teams. But I'm conflicted in the sense because it's moving away from tradition. It's moving away from what I'm used to, and more so to the older audience, what they're used to. This is an even bigger change for them. But I also like it because the Big Ten is showing it is moving into the future. It is adapting, while at the same time prioritizing things that is always prioritized, like academics. So I'm conflicted on this move. The more I think about it, the more I like it, especially if they add more teams from the Mountain West and Pac-12 area, like Utah, Colorado, Oregon, Washington. That would make me love this move, because then you can look on a map and you can see where the Big Ten just stretches out, where there aren't a lot of empty holes, where the empty holes that we have now, there's this massive gap between USC and Nebraska. Colorado and Utah make that, they make that gap smaller. There's actually a road now where you can travel all of the Big Ten in a certain sense, is what I'm trying to say. So tell me down in the comments below, if you're on the YouTube, what you think about this move. What do you think about Michigan playing USC in the regular season? UCLA and Nebraska, they had like a home and home series in 13 and 14. They could play each other in the regular season. Do you think this means that pods and divisions are just out, period? That the Big Ten's going to move to a round-robin schedule? Let me know what you think down in the comments below. And make sure to like this video, hit that subscribe button, and click that notification bell if you're on the YouTube so you can get notified when I post new content and so that you can join this awesome community. I cannot wait for college football. It's just around the corner. I think it's only 8 or 7 weekends away, and those weekends will fly by. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys around. Bye.